All right. Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to the second IC37 webinar. This follows on from our first webinar 2 weeks ago when we talked about rounding the weather mark and setting the spinnaker and jibing downwind. So it's been a long downwind leg last 2 weeks, a lot of excitement. Now we're getting down to the end of the leg, and this webinar is going to be talking about taking the chute down, dropping the chute, and getting around the leeward marks. So just a couple of comments before we get going on today's topic. A quick update on schedule for those, probably most people have seen it. But at this point, you know, all of June has been canceled, as we know, at New York Yacht Club for regattas. The Leukemia Cup has been canceled. Sail Newport, as early July, has been canceled, at least for the IC37s, for any big boats. The New York Yacht Club One Design Regatta is still scheduled for August 22nd, 23rd. And the New York Yacht Club 166th Annual Regatta, which technically was postponed from June, is now scheduled for August 28th through the 30th, assuming that all the state regulations open up enough to allow that to happen, and everything comes together that allows the proper social distancing and adherence to whatever the rules are at the time. Following on from that, race week, which would have been in early July, has been rescheduled for late September. The IRC-ORC Regatta World Championship was for the last week of September. That now has been canceled. So sometime in that block, the Rolex New York Yacht Club race week could be rescheduled. And then following on from that, October 8th through the 12th, we have the Melges IC37 National Championship. So again, stay tuned. New York Yacht Club is making announcements every 15 days. The next one is coming out on the 1st of June, and then following on will be June 15th. So that's it on schedule, what we have so far. I'm now going to turn it over. Oh, excuse me. Before I do that, I want to thank some people here. I want to thank Laura from North Sales again for all her hard work in helping us get this Zoom meeting organized, all the graphics and the presentational material. Melges Boats for all the video, Stu Sorelli for his video support, Ed Adams, Mike Marshall, Bill Gladstone, Dave Dellenbaugh for some graphics, and Dave Reed for some graphic support. So thanks for everyone out there for these guys for helping. And now I'm going to turn it over to Greg Fisher, our class coach, who at this point probably needs no introduction, and he's going to follow on and tell us who's working with tonight and take us through the videos. Over to you, Greg.
Thanks, Phil. I appreciate it. And welcome, everybody. We are once again super lucky to have David Dempsey, Max Hutcheson, and Charlie Smythe with us again. It's great that they're willing to share their time and their expertise, as they are the real deal. They have played a major role in Pacific Yankee success, and you'll be able to tell as you listen to them that not only are they talented, they are excellent team members and how they communicate with one another. And I know we introduced them in detail last webinar, but I just want to touch on real quick so you guys know the talent if you weren't on last week's or last webinar, because these guys are really super talented and great people. David grew up on Manhasset Bay, sailed a wide variety of boats from IMS 40s to TP 52s, and literally all over the world. When he's not sailing, he's a broker with ICAP. We kind of wonder about the timing there. And Max is from San Diego and has been called by the gang out there their go-to crew for San Diego Yacht Club. He's won Worlds in the FAR 40 and was second in the Invitational Cup. And Max is a real estate project manager. And Charlie grew up in New Orleans and has an impressive resume from winning a FAR 40 Worlds with Max and 2 Melges 20 Worlds with Team Pacific Yankee. He pursued a 49er Olympic campaign for 2012 and now enjoys the sailing industry as a boat captain. But in this talk, these guys are going to focus on drops and share the mechanics that they go through, as well as the communication that they they have with one another and their teammates as they discuss leeward, windward, Mexican drops. They're going to talk first through their positions, you'll see, and kind of go through an outline of what they're working on. And then we're going to go through videos that they'll narrate as we go through. And near the end of this webinar tonight, we're going to go through a brief discussion on leeward gates and mark roundings that, though I am afraid that it could be basic, it'll at least give us some prerequisites for our future more detailed leeward mark roundings and gate approaches and that kind of thing. So hopefully that'll work out well. And a number of you have sent in some super questions that we have incorporated into the talk tonight that we'll be sure to answer. But we also want you to not hesitate to use the chat room. And Phil's going to be moderating that. And then when an appropriate question comes up, we'll stop and answer it. And we'll have, and then, but by the way, if we do get a whole bunch of questions and we're not able to answer them all, we will take those questions and answer them either in the next webinar at the beginning or personally answer them to you in an email. So please don't hesitate to put the questions up there. And then there are some that put questions up for webinar 1 that we didn't answer then because it, or in this one because it doesn't necessarily apply, but in the next webinar, we will lay it out there. So sorry to get so long-winded there. I'll let David take it on and talk about his job on the bow as he approaches a leeward mark.
Sure. Thanks, Craig. So, you know, this is a little wordy in here, but for takeaway, but starting just with the approach, you know, we'll see a couple of videos, different tactical situations, just confirming the game plan with the afterguard. Maybe it is going to be a late jibe, what gate is preferred, which way we want to be going upwind, timing on a jib up, which way we're turning, and what kind of douse we're going to do. So we kind of know what the game plan was going in. On the final jibe, pulling enough slack on the spin sheet, making sure it's dropped down on the deck, you know, for the jib up so it doesn't pull the sheet up. I think everybody's been on there, has seen that happen a few times. It changes your timing if you're trying to catch up on that. Once jib is up, the timing of the jib up depends on the boat speed and the tactics. You know, in some cases you're going to have it up already. Just making sure the clue, once it's up, is not disrupting the airflow of the kite, especially in light air. And making sure the jib tack is inside the pulpit. It tends to want to flip outside the pulpit. And then pulling the lazy slack in the spin sheet. I think this is a nice little trick. Just making sure whether it's a leeward drop, early leeward, or a Mexican, or a weather drop, taking the lazy spin sheet that's coming around the headstay and pulling it to the outboard to the starboard side of the boat, outboard of the hatch and the hatch track around the front. That way it keeps the hatch wide open, keeps the sheet out of the hole, makes the douse clean, makes you well set up for the next set. On the weather drop, I want to be positioned at the headstay facing to leeward, right? And my only job there at that point is to make sure that the takedown line is high up the headstay, so it's got a nice clean lead for Max, who's going to pull it down like an animal. And I'm not really going to help on that takedown line. I'm really going to be there to, as soon as the sail starts coming, to get the belly of the sail around the headstay and get to the tack so it doesn't scoop on the water. In the pit, we tend to leave the tack out till near the end of the maneuver to make sure that it's safe. For a leeward drop, I'm going to be positioned in front of the hatch facing aft with the floater at the back of the hatch facing forward. My job is the foot and out to the tack, and the floater is the foot and out to the clue. Again, Max in the pit is pulling the belly of the sail into the hole quite quickly, and we're just doing the cleanup. Same position for a Mexican or an early leeward. It's really the same maneuver. Just on the Mexican, I want to be positioned so I can get outboard to the lifeline on the port side as the kite flops over, so that it's clean into the hole. And that's a bit of timing, and we're going to talk about that a bit later. And then just a quick check for the foot of the jib, make sure it doesn't need to be skirted and it's on the right side of the bow pulpit, all that stuff as the boat's turning and starting to heel over as you're going upwind. And making sure that the corners of the kite are now outside the hatch. Hatch is closed, dogged if it's lumpy. I usually just dog the starboard side. And back on the rail with the halyard, making the halyard on the stanchion. Now we're sailing upwind.
Super, David.
Yeah, so I'm Max. My job on the boat is to basically pull all the things. So I'll be pulling down the kite in this maneuver. And so kind of just starting off, two general notes are making sure that the boat, as David said, has good comms on the kind of takedown. While nothing really changes depending on the maneuver, everybody knowing what they're doing makes a very big difference just in terms of coming on and off the rail and that kind of thing. The second kind of note is that the schwabble, which you're going to hear a lot today, is that the timing of that is arguably the most important part of the maneuver. I can pull as hard as I want, but if the kite doesn't collapse on a leeward drop, it's going to be ugly no matter how strong I decide to be. So you'll hear it a bunch, but the schwabble is a very, very important deal. So kind of going to my job during the maneuver itself, I'm trying to hike as long as humanly possible. Again, especially in breeze, if you're coming down with any kind of pace, this driver needs the weight on the rail as much as he can to keep the boat under control. Then when I come in, I basically take over the area of the cockpit just behind the hatch. And as soon as in a perfect world, if your tactician's comfortable giving a countdown from 10, then kind of at about 8, I'll start pre-tensioning the drop line. And by pre-tension, I literally mean pull as hard as I humanly can, all the way up to the time the thing comes down. I like to kind of do it in such a way that I'll build up a little bit of momentum almost, because you'll kind of go and go until you'll pull as much as you can. Then the schwabble will kind of start, and if there's any delay, the kite will collapse and you'll be able to get another 2 or 3 pulls, and then the kite can drop. Hopefully there's no delay there, so it's all one big rolling maneuver. But at any given point, you got to be whaling on the thing as hard as you possibly can. That means if it's a leeward drop, the foot should be curving in pretty dramatically, and if it's a windward drop, provided that there's enough breeze and you're not destroying or killing the kite, you can almost get the kite coming around the headstay. So that it's a big, big deal. Then kind of, as I mentioned, building momentum through the countdown. And then once the halyard once the drop is called, just pull as hard as you possibly can. It's kind of one of those things where, at least in my mind, it's live by the string, die by the string. And if we die, it's my fault. So I'm pulling as hard as I possibly can. It's got to hype myself up a little bit there. Two kind of things you can notice during the drop is you'll feel if there's any bumps, or if you feel like you kind of lose momentum, call it out as quick as you can. It can either be the halyard got bumped, but it didn't get let back off. It can be the tack's still on, the pole, something is caught. And make sure you say something as quick as you can so that whoever is nearby can fix it. And then something that we do on our boats is that if for whatever reason I'm pull as hard as I possibly can and I'm just smoked, on the boats I've sailed on, we'll have somebody who can tap in if kind of to clean up the very end. On our current boat, Pacific Yankee, it's Charlie, because he's right there in the pit. On previous boats, it's been the outside trimmer. It's kind of the biggest person who's nearby and not fully, and has some options in what they're doing. Then after that, get back on the rail, hike as quick as you can, and that's my part.
Great.
All right. Good job, Max. You definitely pull as hard as you can and all that stuff, and thanks for doing that because it makes such a big deal. But so my name's Charlie, and I do the pit. I basically release everything that Max pulls on. But so what I try and do is I sort of position myself in the actual pit, standing in the companionway, on the stair. No matter what the wind is doing, that's usually where I go, just because the winches are pretty far forward on the boat, so if I'm standing in Max's way, he really gets upset, and I might get an elbow to the ribs or something. But I try and get out of the way as much as possible. But I place myself in the hatch so that I can kind of have access to all the clutches and do everything I need to do from there. I place the jib halyard on the winch and into the self-tailer as it's going up. When the jib's going up, I usually do like one wrap on the winch and pull from there because it's a nice lead for the clutch. And we have a nice little mark set up right in front of in between the clutch and the actual winch itself. We have a nice little hash marks with numbers there so we can match where the jib was on the last upwind. No matter what drop it is, we talked last week about throttling the jib halyard as it's coming down. Throttling means just slamming the clutch open and then closing it after the halyard goes out about, I don't know, 20 or 30 feet on the spinnaker halyard, that would be. That's sort of my thing. It's like Max said, you sort of have to commit to it, live by the string, die by the string type mentality. Like, I will just literally open the clutch. I don't ever put the spinnaker halyard on the winch and open the clutch and try and ease the halyard down. I literally, no matter what it's blowing, just grab the clutch, open it up, and then be very aware of how fast it's going and what's going on. And then I time the close to let Max kind of catch up with the drop line. One thing you don't want to do is open up the clutch before Max has gotten a lot of tension on the drop line, because if he doesn't have tension on the drop line and if the kite hasn't collapsed a little bit, then it's just going to suck the drop line out of Max's hands, and the halyard's going to go to leeward, and it's going to get super tight, and it'll end up being a disaster. But so you really want to make sure that Max is ready, or your string drop guy is ready, and then you just open the clutch and blow it, and then that really gets the whole drop going. Once Max kind of has control and he gets that momentum built up, that's when I release the tack line. I'm a big fan of keeping the clew back and the tack all the way out at the end of the pole so that the foot's nice and stretched. I'm a big fan of just going for the halyard no matter what drop, and then doing the tack and the pole afterwards. Again, I'm in the pit, so standing on the stairs. So if Max calls out that he's smoked, or I need to step in, or I can see him struggling, the thing is right there next to my hip, and I can just start pulling with him no matter what. Or if he has it under control and everything's going fine, then I'll just go to the rail and be weight. Our floater does a great job of setting everything else up, so all I have to do is manage the halyard down and the tack and the pole in, which I forget the pole about half the time, and she does it for me. But other than that, it's pretty simple. But again, my biggest takeaways are I don't ever put the spinnaker halyard on the winch, especially if the jib halyard is preloaded, which is what I like to do. Always load the jib halyard onto the winch, into the self-tailer with the clutch closed, and maybe even with a handle in sometimes if I know that they're going to maybe want to make an adjustment right away. Last thing you want to do is be too loose on the halyard and then be searching around for the winch handle. So you try and just get it all set up, and then like I said, just drop the halyard and let the string do what it's supposed to do. So those are sort of my biggest takeaways.
Great,
Great.
Charlie.
All right, let's roll into a couple of videos here. And remember, anybody have any questions, use the chat box, and we'll try to pick them up as we go along here.
This is going to be early leeward into a Mexican. You can see the foot is stretched like Charlie just talked about. The clew is back by the shrouds and staying there. The tack's out till the end. It's nice and clean, goes in the hole. no twists.
Right.
Yeah.
So the clue's pretty far back there.
Yep.
Right.
The belly cord's got a nice line straight into the hatch.
And you could tell that Max had a big load on it before Charlie cut it loose, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I know that those guys are ready too. I see that takedown line getting tensioned like that.
Really tight.
Yeah, then we know we're all ready to go.
Right.
And David, you mentioned that is the clue going forward is often a big problem, right? That's an important part of this.
Yeah, I mean, it can lead to a kind of chaos down below. You want that takedown line to have a clean run to the back of the boat. So that's why we stress getting that lazy sheet out of the way and keeping the clue and tack out of the way.
Yeah, if you keep the clue nice and far back, you can make it so that the patch goes to the back of the boat, but the corners all stay pretty far forward. And so even if anything does go wrong, it's easy for whoever has to go fix it to kind of see what's going on.
Corners are pretty spread out there. Tack and pole are still out. And then
Yeah, and you can kind of see also that, you know, as soon as Max gets tension on that drop line, like the halyard's coming down, because it deforms the kite so much that if you're just sailing along with the drop string, you know, super tight, the kite's not really doing that much for you there. Or it's so distorted that you want to just start the drop as soon as he's got tension on that thing.
Phil, I think we missed the first one. I think did we
skip a video?
Yeah, I think we did the very first one. Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Did we? Sorry.
No, that's good.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I don't know that.
I think we can see in this video that Max certainly earns his keep in a cold one at the end of the day. So, Max, one thing that somebody asked was about the friction pulling in the takedown line. Clearly, there is friction here. So, but maybe you mentioned some things that help with that. And
yeah, so I mean, there's a few things on it. The first part is kind of you just got to accept to a certain extent that it is what it is. But as you're going through, if it feels heavy the entire time, there's a reasonable chance that it's either having an issue at the clutch or that it's got a problem in the rig. I know I've been on boats that have had both happen. So if it feels ridiculously heavy the entire time, you can definitely look at both those things. If it feels like you're getting kind of point loads or something like that, then that's most likely that you're running into either the halyard being too tight or clutch too much, or the tack getting clutch, or one of the sheets. So that's why it's important you call those out. But in general, if it feels like there's too much base friction, then it's probably in the rig or in the clutch.
So there's Charlie Wright getting ready to let the clutch down. You have plenty of tension on the takedown line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this one really shows that perfectly timed swaggle with the drop. It's short-lived. The bow just comes down. He's pretty hot here, and then the bow just comes down for 1 or 2 seconds. The takedown line's tensioned, and the halyard's ready to drop. Yeah,
and again, with the whole point of the schwabble being just to get the kite collapsed, you're not staying down with the schwabble to finish the drop. All you're trying to accomplish there is to collapse the kite. And typically, especially if there's enough pre-tension, it shouldn't take that much of a schwabble because the kite's already a little deformed, as Charlie said anyway. So if you have the pre-tension, the little schwabble, the kite will collapse on you and you can go back to your normal sailing pretty quick.
Max, is there communication with the driver there, or is he just watching and he can tell that you've got it and the chute's collapsed and he can turn back up?
I'm not talking at this point. I think generally the tactician will be going through kind of his countdown, and whether that be you drop on 0 or you drop on 3, it'll be the tactician will kind of be the vocal person on the boat at this point, and I'll only speak up if there's a problem. The driver should have a pretty good line of sight to see what's going on. I mean, So my kind of base reference point is that he shouldn't start turning until the patch hits the hatch. If he can hold the turn up until then he's probably in a pretty good shape. And ideally, if it all is going well, then when he finishes his turn to be upwind, most of the kite will be away.
So finishing the turn. Maybe a little bit back.
And David, you'd be facing aft here with the floater facing, that's the floater we're looking at.
Yeah, well, that's the leeward. I'd be facing aft for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if it's super windy, you know, Max might turn around and kind of give a little chirp before it all happens and say, hey, remember to give me a nice swabble here, you know, like there will be a little bit of communication if he's concerned about, you know, depends on who's driving.
Yeah, and to that same point, that I self-imposed my rule of thumb that if it's over 18 knots, the leeward drop is going to be a hate mission.
Yeah.
So give me a lot of room, please. Below that, kind of everything always functions the same, but at that, after a certain point, getting the kite in the boat is a bit of a trip. So I know this is kind of a good example, especially between bow 22 and the boat behind, of how much the pre-tension matters. You can see kind of as soon as our kite's dropping, it's already sucking in. And as the boat behind drops, the kite's going to go away from the boat pretty aggressively at first.
Mm. Charlie, can I ask something there? So the pole and the tackle went in nice and smooth, and of course, but one of the questions somebody had is what things can go wrong for you at that point, you know, that would, you know.
Yeah, the biggest thing would be getting a knot in the halyard, you know, like the tack and the pole are pretty short lines. So you don't really get too much. Maybe the clutch will reclose on you or something like that, but more often than not, your biggest worries are with the halyard getting a knot in it, or you know, because then if it's under a lot of tension, it's not going to come out very easily, and so you just want to make sure that your halyard is run really clean. And a lot of that is maybe if the halyard's not the right length, you know, you want to have enough slack in the halyard to where, you know, it's not pulling on the kite while you're actually sailing downwind. Our halyard is covered basically all the way from the taper, from the top part all the way to the patch. I think that gives Max a lot to pull on. You know, it gives them a thicker diameter to get it in. Some people, if you run too much of a taper on the drop line, you won't get as good of a grip. But the biggest thing is just making sure that the halyard runs smooth.
Yeah, if the taper comes through the block at the base of the mast, it's probably too long.
Yeah. That's sort of another reason why I like to position myself in the companionway, because if something gets messed up down below, then I'm in a very good position to just duck down in below and become a squirrel all of a sudden, you know, and I can just start pulling it in manually.
I think this one is a good example, maybe where I want to be up at the headstay and facing that leeward side, rather than down into leeward here, just so I can get more sail around the headstay and control the tack in case it gets away. And in this case, the tack is released, which is a little awkward, and it gets away from them a little bit.
Let's talk about that, guys. You guys haven't mentioned anything about the tack and pole here. during the sequencing. Are you guys don't do a tack release, right? From what we've heard so far.
All the roundings the same, tack and pole, or after the halyard's under good control.
Yeah, I would say as the patch hits the hole is when I'm going to release the tack and the pole. There's no reason. There's no resistance on the foot or the tack or anything like that before the patch goes into the hole.
Okay, so we've had a question. The question is, what is the patch? So when do you guys want to pick that up?
Yeah, the patch is the actual sewn-in piece on the spinnaker that the drop line attaches to. So it's a big circular patch that's sewn into the spinnaker that the drop line pulls in, that the drop line ties into.
Right there.
Yeah.
You can see my,
We
just
just
about
rip it out once from the sail.
Right. Good swabble there by Jim. Get that shoot down, right? Coming in hot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, David, while we're looking at the bow person here and the sheet and the takedown line, can you talk one more time about how you're handling those, around the headstay and the pulpit and
Yeah. I mean, like I said before, the takedown line is really being handled at the back of the boat and not so much on the bow. There's not that much I can offer for assistance. So the biggest thing, in my opinion, is to be forward and getting the first bit of sail that comes near the boat. All that's dropped over the boat right now, that's what you can help the most with. And then getting the tack under control.
Yeah, if the two guys on the bow can keep the kite out of the water, that also saves you from a heck of a lot of friction, whether it be getting it around the bow a little quicker or over the lifeline in a Leeward drop.
Yeah, the other thing here too is that Leeward, that lazy sheet is pretty high and out of reach.
Yeah.
And she's got to spend a little time getting that to get it on around the hatch. They've got to reach for it, got to get it done. I guess that's a distraction. You'd rather get that done before you need to start pulling sail, right, guys?
Yeah, for sure. That's like part of the prep. Yep.
Right.
And I think on this boat too, they go to a system where they've got two people pulling the drop line, which in some circumstances is fine. I mean, this is pretty light air, so in a perfect world, hopefully that doesn't have to be a thing. If you're going to need to have two people interact with the line, having one person go as hard as they possibly can and someone finish it off is a lot more effective, or at least in my experience. If you have two people doing it, they just end up pulling at weird timings, and I've fallen over once or twice because of that.
Right. Yeah, I sort of see Max can do a fair bit of it hand over hand, and then if I see Max, really get down on his haunches and like pull with both. If he's pulling with both hands, then I know that he's probably needing help. And like just sort of like how you bump up the main halyard when you're going out sailing and you have a couple guys pulling on it. If it gets to that point and there's that much friction, then we try and sync up and pull together, just like those guys were doing in the video there.
Okay, we're gonna play this next video. There's a little sailing here. So while we're sailing a little bit, the question has been, how is the spin halyard laid out for a fast release without knots? So how do you guys, what do you guys, how do you clean up your?
Again, that goes back to sort of having it the right length. If you have excess halyard that is unnecessary, that's normally, if the halyard's the right length, then you only have about, I don't know, I would say, 3 meters or 4 meters, about 15 feet of halyard that's down below that's kind of slack. So you don't really have to like flake it out or do anything. You just kind of pull slack in it and throw it over the rail or over near the stanchion there. And then as Max is pulling it, then if he pulls too much and the halyard's not coming down, then you end up with excess slack. So it's a bit of a timing thing. But again, it's really making sure that your halyard is the right length.
Yeah, and just as a note on the length, at least what I've noticed has worked pretty well is that when you've got the halyard in your connected to base of the shrouds, like you're going upwind, the patch should just kind of get forward of the mast down below, just barely. And that seems to be a good general measurement for that.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe what we can do, Greg, is get some of this stuff out on some of these notes about the halyard length out, because I don't think we have that written down anywhere.
Yeah, that's really good stuff.
I can measure mine this weekend and get back to you guys.
Yeah. So here we didn't quite get the takedowns. We got 2 boats sailing. The leeward marks are here, boom, boom. And 2 boats sailing down here. You guys want to set this up? You know, what are you thinking here as a team? What are you getting ready for?
I mean, I think a big part of this one is that specifically for the 3 of us, aside from the fact that there's going to be an extra maneuver, not much about our job actually changes. So making sure that you're kind of consistent in your maneuver, because I think 7 probably in a perfect world might have wanted to go straight, but now that they're going to end up ultimately jibing here, making sure that you do the maneuver proficiently no matter what plan kind of gets thrown at you is a big deal. And not much really changes for the guys up forward maneuver or between the different options. So just the consistency is a big deal here.
Yeah, I mean, what you're hearing is a lot of the steps are all the same regardless of the maneuver, and just give the options to the tactician.
Yeah, and the leeward boat here did a leeward sort of weather takedown and then jibed into a right mark, right turn. So we have a question about what is a swabble. And I think, it's a term, I think, people may call it different things, but we get into, we'll go a little further here, maybe in the next video. And so we'll explain in a little bit more detail exactly what that is. So this is a light air, setting ourselves up here, light air, jibs down. We know from seeing this is going to be left mark, left turn. That's been the call on the boat.
Yeah, one thing we talked about when we saw this is a lot of times we'll try and have the bow person put the jib up, so the middle of the boat people are waiting.
Right, so kind of a subtle difference here. Bow person is doing things up forward, sort of, but the mast person, oh wait, jib ended up, I wasn't, sorry, I didn't go back far enough. Oh. You got the mast guy doing the jib here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, during the summer, we would have me pulling up the jib, and the scramble from the mast to the pit it just adds more moving parts than is necessary. And I think David alluded to it earlier in his notes that generally having the jib up for an extra few seconds isn't going to kill you.
Right.
So having it nice and clean and less moving parts is nice. Okay,
so let's just hit that swabble thing here. So maybe not the best example we have, but here's a turn down. The spinnaker gets collapsed dramatically here, and so it comes down. And I think that's what we're calling the swabble, is that maneuver where the boat is pretty far downwind and the kite releases.
Phil, I think the best illustration is probably the first video, the yellow kite, where you see the tiller.
Yeah. All right. I hear. We'll go back to that.
Yeah.
You guys want to comment on this right here where we ended up?
Was this another real good example of the clue not being back far enough?
Correct.
Yeah, for sure. I think you can see kind of right as they start to turn down, the clue actually goes forward pretty dramatically. Mm-hmm. So I think in a perfect world, it might come back a little bit and at the very least not go forward. If it stays where it is, it kind of makes it so the kite wants to fall on the boat and the patch is nicely lined up to suck the kite in from the middle. Whereas if everything goes forward, it's very oddly proportioned on the bow and just creates more friction.
Yeah, so the clue goes pretty far forward on this. It's a little hard driving here, but oops, wow. So the clue ends up way far forward. It gets released, ends up way up, almost by the headstay. Okay, probably not ideal. Okay. All right, let's go.
You know, speaking of the Schwabble, you guys, just real quick, we have a lot of people on tonight that aren't just IC37 sailors. On other asymmetric boats, would this be something you guys would maybe see some sort of a modified version of to help get that chute in too?
I mean, if there's no string,
Yeah,
it's going to be
absolutely.
longer, more dramatic, the swabble.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of thing. Yeah, the main point is just to get the kite under control for, and kind of, so the smaller the boat, kind of the smaller the schwabble you can do, but the bigger the boat, the more dramatic it's going to have to be, because the bigger the kite, the more effort it takes to get it to collapse.
Gotcha.
So a similar takedown here that we had just in the last video. Oops. What would you guys say about that one?
I think it's a good example, again, of letting the clue sneak forward on you kind of subtly. It looks like it just kind of got eased probably a second early, and then also not enough pre-tension on the kite, so it kind of, again, goes out before it comes in.
Yeah, and I think that just kind of, more of an emphasis on reclosing that clutch halfway through the douse as well, so it doesn't get into the water. It's
Yeah, a little bit just controlling the foot more than anything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So Charlie, would you be eyeballing the chute down low or up high?
I mean, I think that having the clue back would have kept a lot of that kite out of the boat. I mean, out of the water, and then the boat more. So I think it's an emphasis on getting the foot into the boat. The kite will get the takedown line will get the belly of the kite into the boat. It's just the manual labor of it is getting the foot into the boat. And that, by having the clue back, that makes it a lot easier.
Gotcha.
So we got, just following up on the last bit of the slide, we thought this was pretty good rounding, right? Jib was nice.
Yeah.
Held his lane.
Yeah.
And
It showed a nice rounding where he sailed really deep so he could be close hauled as he put his bow at the mark.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that later. I think this is the same thing, but on board.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a good note of, in this case, it's the bow person watching the lazy kite sheet, making sure that that thing doesn't get skied, so it's not a pain to deal with later.
Right. Again, pretty good takedown, except just the clue could have come back a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, specifically from that video, you can see as the drop line is getting tension, it's almost by the clue already, meaning that their foot's not stretched enough. You can kind of see in a few seconds here, it'll be, the drop line will start to load up, and it's already deep, like in the back third of the foot, about there. You can see it's pretty close to the foot already.
The clue, yeah.
Or yeah, clue, sorry.
Okay. Sounds good. What else we got? We've got one more here. I think we wanted to move this up, move this on up a little bit.
Same thing, clues forward again.
Forward. I don't know if it's our choice of videos, whether this just happened a lot out there. Chances are it probably happened a lot. It's sort of a natural tendency probably for somebody to release the sheet thinking they're collapsing the chute.
Well, you guys pointed out that it was back and then all of a sudden got released, right?
Yeah, you can see it gets released like a second and a half early, probably. Like right, yeah, there. It's almost that you have to keep the sheet tension for like 2 or 3 seconds into the drop, and then you're in good shape. The kite will kind of fold almost around the drop line, and that's kind of a nice indication.
Down the center seam of the kite. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here, right at the end, you see it slide aft. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Oh no, that's pretty good douse though.
Yeah, came out nice and clean.
Okay, so I'll go back to the swabble a little bit on the first slide, but why don't we keep going here? I know, Greg, you want to talk a little bit more about the actual approach and setting yourself up at the leeward mark, right?
Yeah, and again, like I said earlier, you guys, I apologize if this is basic, but this could be like a prerequisite. But we had a bunch of questions that kind of led a part of this discussion, and the first one was talk about the timing to execute a good rounding, you know, how far away from the mark you should press it, when you should start your drop. And actually, as we discussed it, it was interesting to hear David, Max, and Charlie talk about it. So, and actually, Max, I think you had a really good timing as far as when the spinnaker patch should be in the hatch and when you should start to drop. So if you guys would talk through that, because clearly that's a critical maneuver, right? If we don't get it in the boat as we're making the rounding, you know, we can lose.
Yeah, for sure. So correct me if I misphrase anything here, but I think the general rule of thumb that I've been pretty comfortable with, and I think we're pretty comfortable with, is that the kite ought to start coming down. So wherever in the countdown your tactician is, that the halyard drops is about 2 boat lengths out, let's say, unless it's pretty windy, like 15 plus, where you're fully ripping along, and then it kind of backs out to the 3 boat length circle and maybe a touch outside. But so that'll be, or at about 2 boat lengths, you'll start the drop, do the schwabble, and the skipper, ideally, obviously there's some tactical stuff that's going to have to go on here, but in a perfect world, we'll hold the bow down for you, or we'll keep the bow deep in the schwabble until the kite's collapsed, and then not dramatically turn up until the patch is at the hatch. And then kind of the good timing for that is on that timing, you ought to be able to get the rest of the kite the majority of the way into the boat by the time he's on a close haul course.
Gotcha. And I put practice timing here. I just was going to suggest, obviously, practicing the mechanics of this, but the timing so that you know how long it takes. Like if you were sailing downwind, you bore off around the mark to do your schwabble, and then dropped your chute, and then did a turn up like you're going around a gate, get a really good idea how long that would be. And like Max said, the goal would be a couple lengths if you could. So number 2 here is really basic. Obviously, we got to be inside at the mark. It's crucial. And we say this because we're going to see in a couple of videos where people don't slow down perhaps early enough, and they get pinned underneath the boat inside, or they're not able to swing up inside them as they go around the mark and follow them through the turn and have a nice lane once they get around the mark. A boat length behind is a good allowance. That's a long distance, you know, but if we can time it so we're half a length or so, or a length, then we'll have clear air and we can live there a little bit longer. Communicate with challenging boats. I don't know if you guys saw in one of those drops a boat, and actually they did a nice job of getting out of there, like they were trying to take room. Clearly they didn't. They bailed out, and they did a nice job of bailing out. But communicate with boats well before you get to the zone, like 6, 8, 10 lengths away, maybe just yelling over, hey, would you agree we're overlapped here, to kind of set the stage. Use the appropriate rounding style for the situation. We'll talk about that here in a second. And remember, boat balance, sail trim when rounding. This is much like just in little boats where we want to keep the boat balanced as we're going through the turns. And we'll see in a couple of videos here where the jib comes in, maybe not only tight, but comes in well before the main is in. And we can get away with that in a bigger boat, obviously, but that's going to make it harder for the boat to carry through the rounding and up on its close haul course. So what I was going to point out, in an ideal world, I would love to see the jib ease so that the front 1.5 foot of the luff is actually breaking as the boat is turning up. So that would be a guide maybe that the trimmer would be matching, is that the jib would just be luffing a little bit more as it heads up until they're close hauled.
And then just a quick note on the boat handling side of that is that if the tactician, obviously if there's lots and lots going on, this might not be perfect, but every chance the tactician has to give a good countdown makes a big, big difference, especially because you're trying to coordinate 9 people and kind of this big dance on the boat. So the best communication you can have out of your tactician makes a big, big difference.
Yeah, agree with that.
Good point. So these diagrams, I just got to do a little plug here for Dave Dellenbaugh, everybody. I called him, just said, hey, do you have any good diagrams? And he said, sure, and shared 1 million of them with me. And then we ended up talking about going into gates and all that, and spent an hour going over it. It was really cool. But I just want to put a plug in. If you're looking for more webinars, David's doing a great deal of them coming up here, and you can see them on his website, Speed and Smarts. But it's cool in our sport that people would share like this, and I certainly appreciate it. But interestingly enough, a strategic rounding is our goal for a mark rounding. There's a lot, some people call it an apex rounding, whatever, where instead of the wide and tight and sailing deep below that mark, you just round it so when you're going by it, you're on a close reach or almost a beam reach. You come out of the mark rounding, maybe not as close a lane as if you were close hauled, like in the tactical rounding below, but you don't sail below that X distance we see in the bottom diagram. Having said that, I think in many one designs we all sail in, and we're in such a tight quarters. We have a boat in front of us. We often have a boat right behind us that we have to make sure it doesn't get up on our hip, or we're not allowed to tack. We can't tack. But the tactical rounding, I think, is one that, frankly, I would end up using more than I would the strategic rounding because of boats around. Where that really helps is if we're in first or we're last, or if we're going around opposite gates and there's nobody around. But I'm sure the tactician is thinking about it, and as you go into the mark rounding, describing what you're looking for here. Because going that X distance down is going to ensure that as you come up with your bow on the mark, you know, with the tactical rounding, you'll be in a close hauled lane, and you'll end up to weather of the boat that did a strategic rounding. So, and then, like I said, I talked to Dave Dellenbaugh quite a bit about this, and this was kind of interesting. And people ask about entering the gates, what, you know, how you know which gate's favored, you know, and how you choose which gate you want to go to. And there's many reasons for a favored gate. Maybe they're just simply one's higher than the other, and you can check that, of course, before the start, hopefully. Maybe it's a favored side of the course, which is caused by breeze, current. Maybe the course is a little bit out of whack, and the top mark's a little bit more to the right or the left. maybe it's simply that you want to turn left so that when you come back, you have a starboard advantage on the boats coming from the left side of the course. But the biggest one that I think is important for choosing the gate mark is traffic, you know, and we need to be able to kind of put that situation together before we get there so we can put ourselves in a spot that we are as clean as we can be. So we need a plan well before the bottom 100 yards. But this diagram on the right is of a symmetrical spinnaker going into a mark, you know, and the idea is here when you get to that X point, you have the opportunity to be on a ley line to either one of the gate marks, you know, and you can choose then, you know, and it's pretty nice. And it's rare that you're in a boat on your breeze kind of condition. Obviously, it's quite different than a symmetrical program like we see here. So I took Dave's neat diagram and I butchered it up with my own marks on it. And what he and I talked about is that a similar deal, you need to set an imaginary X, like I did here, up almost half again as high, so that that would be the spot that you'd try to come across the course and give yourself the opportunity to sail out to either side, jibe, and then have time to get the spinnaker down as you get close to the zone like we see here. And ideally, you'd try to enter at the top of the zone so that you could swabble down as Max was saying. But the advantage of this is it still gives you the opportunity to, if you're coming from the course right, as we're looking upwind, and you're thinking you're going to do a left turn, and then there's a lot of traffic at the left turn, you can just sail straight across to the right mark as well. It just gives you that option. So
yeah, and just as a quick thought for tacticians' consideration, coming in hot on starboard into the leeward mark is kind of, it's not setting your crew up for success, since that's going to be a hot leeward drop. So again, that's kind of one of those things where it's an unnecessary risk most of the time that we can try to avoid if possible.
yeah. Would you say, Max, ideally, as you're getting out to that point when you jibe, you'd see that there was a lot of traffic at that left mark, and maybe you'd then jibe a little bit earlier so it wasn't quite as dangerous a tight reach going in there?
That would be fantastic. I know what some of the tacticians I've sailed with have thought about is that unless it's a big gate, which we don't have, or at least I don't think I've seen too many giant gates in the 37s, is you can almost aim for the middle of the gate most of the time as a rough guide, and you'll end up in at least a safe spot. It might not end up perfectly, but it's a good safe reference.
Yeah, that's good. That pretty much puts you at the top of the zone as well.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is this first turn, and you guys please, throw your thoughts in here too. This is your basic strategic apex type turn. We originally thought this would be a decent one to show a drop in the spinnaker, but it's more of a close reach around the mark here, and there's nobody around. So a nice clean rounding.
Yeah, I think something we had noted is that it's hard to say without being on the boat, but the jib could have been a little bit on the tight side of life.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's pretty good.
And ideally, you might not have had the main trimmed in, while we're being kind of selective here. Maybe the main would be eased as well until you come around the mark. And that goes back to what we were talking about with balancing the rate of the turn with the sails. So this is one that's the other kind of gray day during the Invitational Cup.
Sorry.
No,
Driving. Here we go.
So this is a tactical rounding here. And obviously they maybe got to shoot down a little later. They didn't follow Max's guideline, but they sailed well deep here, carved up. It appears the jib is eased as best we can tell here. And obviously they're close hauled when they go alongside the mark. Now you might say, there's not too much other traffic around here, so maybe they could have done more of a strategic rounding, like we see the boat on the far gate do. Like if we look with the boat here dropping their chute, the yellow one, they do more of a strategic round, I think.
Yeah. Oops, let me back it up. Sorry.
No, but I mean, just that's where we see the difference. Anything you guys want to add there?
All good on my end.
All right. That's good on that one. And then this shows the sail trim thing we're talking about, where it'd be nice to keep the jib eased. And here we see the jib is not eased a great deal as we head up.
Second boat is.
Yeah, the second one's eased nice. Maybe it could come in a little more smartly there, but you can really feel that the bow can come up quicker when the jib is luffing in the front like that. And then this next shot, I think it's really clear that the jib is really tight because we can see backwind in the main right there. And clearly, if the jib's that tight that we've got backwind as we're heading up, you know, we're either the main's under trimmed or the jib is over trimmed. But in case of a tie, the jib has to match the main and the rate of the turn. So if the jib's over trimmed, it's just going to try to pull the bow down.
Yeah, it's kind of all thinking about having the slot open between the two sails. Even if you're behind, having the slot open is bigger for having the flow as you go all the way upwind.
Exactly. Exactly.
I think this is shows it maybe a little more dramatically.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. This is one where obviously we got 3 boats abreast. And the boats do a nice job of, I guess you'd want to call it schwabbling, sailing deep so they can do a tactical rounding. But if the jib on this boat we see here was eased more, and you can see it's tight compared to the main, they would have a little easier opportunity to kind of come up inside that boat. And then this one, I think this,
Sorry.
that's okay.
This guy's jib's pretty tight here, right?
Already, yeah. And the main's eased. So there's, you're right, Phil, there's a perfect example. And as a result, he's not able to turn up inside this boat and he has to follow down below.
Right. Both boats do.
Yeah. So the moral of the story is there, it's not bad to back off the throttle a little early. And a good way to do that is by easing the jib so that you can put the bow where you want it and you can carve up inside. And again, I know this is basic stuff but it's good just to have it as a prerequisite. So this is interesting. 2 boats going into the gate together. That's Phil behind with the dolphins on the sail that is coming across the course, as Max was saying, to the other gate where there is no traffic. So that was a good move. And the story here is just simply that in an ideal world, one would have stayed deeper, kept their jib out, and come up behind the other boat instead of been pinned below.
Yeah, and a good rule of thumb is just always trying to keep your bow clear. So even if you end up a little deep, at least if your bow's clear, you can tack out of there or something. It gives you any options other than being stuck right to leeward of the guy.
Right, right. I mean, certainly this isn't what anybody intended, but you're right. This is probably as tough a spot as you could possibly be in right here because you're in their gas. The other boat's going to come up in behind clearly, and then you can't tack with that boat behind. So it's tough, but like right there, maybe a little more of a schwabble or maybe a lot more of a schwabble, and then staying down at this point, like you're saying, Max, so your bow was behind their stern might have really helped.
Right.
But I think that's what we have there.
Yeah, I think that's it. Do we want to go real quick back to the swabble bit? And then I know we're running a little late, but this will take only a second. Oh, is it the right one?
Yeah, that's
yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you're able to watch the bow on land here, that's kind of the best example or best way to see how far down. And then you can also see the tiller for the steering itself. But it kind of gives you an idea of how long he's actually down for. You can see turns right there. And then he's already coming back up.
Yep. And that's coming in overstood with the Leeward. So that's the tough scenario. And that's all it took, just 1 or 2 seconds.
Great. Okay. All right. Greg, you want to just...
Great. I think, you know, I think one thing we want to emphasize, you guys, is to everybody that's listening, please take advantage of, you know, the talent that we have here. And if you have questions, you know, don't hesitate to send them into that email address there. These guys are anxious to help and answer anything that you want to know. And David, Max, Charlie, you guys are great once again. And it's cool not only to learn from you, but to see what a team you guys are together. And certainly I think we all learned a lot from that too. And Laura, thanks for running the show for us in the background there.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, well, we'll see everybody. Guys, we're going to talk about upwind trim on the third webinar on June 15th. It's a Monday night. We're changing it up a little bit so we can have the right experts available. So it'll be a Monday night, June 15th. A little bit longer gap here, but it should be a good one. Mike Marshall and a few others will join us, right, Greg?
Yep.
So we'll have a good one. Thank you, Greg. Thank you guys for input. The last 2 webinars, great to see it. I think you're right. One of the big lessons here was not only what you guys are doing, but the teamwork, and you've basically thought it through in detail, and that shows. So thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks,
Thank
Greg.
you. Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Bye.
Yeah, bye.